All right, everybody, thank you for coming, and let me come and talk to you. How many of you have heard of the universal model? So, how many have never heard of universal model, the book? Okay, so that's about half. That's good. How many of you have heard of Rod Meldrum and the Book of Mormon geography? Okay, is there anybody here that hasn't heard of him? So I know he's been up here before. My brother Henry's probably been up here too. Anybody know my brother Henry? Oh, I'd expect a lot of you to know that because he kind of gets around. How many of you are homeschoolers? So, and then community school or a public school? Is it publicly funded or a charter school? Is that a charter school? Okay. We're going to be kind of talking a little bit about that today and about one of the reasons we think it's really important to get our kids back in our homes, and we'll talk about that. Tonight, I'm talking about truth and science. Can we turn these bigger lights off? And that way you can see the screen just a little better. Now, science and religion have often been disconnected because we've kind of put them in a separate place. Maybe it's even a separate bookshelf in your house. And if you're interested in science, great. But if it's not that interesting to you, it's kind of put that aside. But religion kind of takes front and center for a lot of us. But I actually believe that they are the same. They are an important part of how that is. And today, whether we like it or not, we have been influenced to a large degree by what modern science says, even if we don't believe in it. It's coming about in all sides. My dear friend Dean, the author of the Universal Model, and his wife Danette have been an enormous influence on our lives in our family. We have 15 children, and some of them are special needs. We have 2 autistic daughters, we have a deaf daughter, and we've had some other challenges, and so our schooling experience has been pretty crazy, pretty varied. And those things have influenced a lot of how we've come about our own curriculum. And then my time with Dean, in addition to just working my normal job, I spent 15 years and 20,000 hours doing the edit of Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the Universal Model. This is the book right here, Volume 1. Volume 2 is about the same, so you can see it's a big read. It's a slog. It's about 800 pages. It's fantastic if you love science. If you don't, you look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stuff to read. So if you do that, read the pictures. But the important thing is what this has done for our family. It's fundamentally transformed our family in a way that scriptures have come alive. Another thing that I've been involved in is with the Joseph Smith Foundation and a lot of church history. I've edited all of Hannah Stoddard's books. I don't know if you've heard of her or know Hannah Stoddard. But I've edited all of her work, and so we've done many firesides and presentations together. That's really brought the gospel with the science and the scriptures and the worldview, and it's kind of brought it all together to make it a very cohesive thing. And then, of course, you met my wife, and our youngest kids go with us pretty much everywhere now. And we were just talking on the way up here. We have averaged this year an average of 700 miles a week that we've driven from here to Boston to Virginia and just all over the place doing tours, firesides, other kind of things. But they've had a lot of fun. Mostly they sit in the back and they get to see cool stuff. If you haven't, maybe we can pass around something. If we would get your email, put it on there so we can share other stuff that we have. We've got a lot of things that we're working on right now. And we want to make sure that you're a part of that journey. So you can either see us out there at the table with Heidi, or just subscribe, or even go on your phone right now and subscribe. I'll show you that QR code later, but that QR code can take you right to our subscription page. So I have a question for you. What do you believe that you know is not true? Okay, that's kind of a trick question, right? What do you believe that you know is not true? Anything? Pretty much everything you believe to be true, or otherwise, if you knew it wasn't true, you wouldn't believe it. Fair enough? The problem is we don't all believe the same thing. So that means one or both of us are wrong in something, and it requires new information. So tell me something. How much is this worth to you? If you see this, what would you tell me this is worth? How many of you think it's worth 20 cents? Okay? It's a pair of dimes worth 20 cents. Until I show you one little thing. 1963. Anybody know what that happened? In 1964, they changed from silver to non-silver coins. So these are actually silver coins. They're not worth 20 cents. They're worth about $2 to $3. Okay, so now do you believe that those dimes are still worth 20 cents? Guess what you just had? A paradigm shift. Very good. Okay, so we're going to talk about some things you might not already believe in, but this is what your kids believe in, and this is what your grandkids believe in. And the problem is, it doesn't matter what church you go to. It doesn't matter. Across the entire Christian church spectrum, whether you're in the LDS church or any divergent group, or whether you're just in a Pentecostal or an evangelical church, 70% of the millennial generation are leaving the faith of their fathers. And that's projected to be about 90% of the younger generation of my kids that were up here helping me out. That's the percent of the people, the kids that are leaving. And the number one reason they're leaving is because of science. Now, there are lots of other things too, like difficulty with church doctrine or all kinds of things that play into that. But the number one thing is science, because science, they have more faith in science, and in a way, it's our fault. It's our fault, especially dads. It's our fault. Why? Because we might not let them go watch R-rated movies. We might not let them participate in some of the crazy stuff that goes on in the world, but we'll sit them down in front of a BBC Earth nature show and let them watch that all day long. And we'll talk about all these things, and all through those things, they are being told billions of years ago, evolution this evolved to that, and millions of years. And so we have benignly allowed those kind of influences to shape our children's minds, and in very subtle ways. This is what you have been told, and you've been told no matter how far back you go, even if you've been in a very closed system, you still have heard that humans have come from an ancestor common with the ape. Everybody's been told that. You might not believe it, but you've been told that, right? You've heard it again and again and again. And where did that come from? That all came from single-celled organisms, bacteria, millions of years ago. That's the whole theory of evolution. That whole theory is based on this other theory by James Hutton, that the earth is hot and molten, that's incalculably old and molten at its center. So a lot of you might think, well, we don't believe in evolution, but have you ever actually questioned that the earth doesn't have hot molten magma in the middle of it? Scientifically or any other way? Probably not. Because we've been taught, our parents have been taught, and our grandparents have been taught from the same books. And that goes back a long ways. In fact, if you go back to the turn of the century in the 1900s, there were a couple of guys, John Whitsoe and James Talmage, who went back east, got their degree in science. James Talmage was a geologist, and he was influential in getting BYU and Utah State accredited. And then John Whitsoe was a biologist who was influential in getting USU accredited as a college university. Now, even though you might not go or subscribe to that today, 75 years ago, your ancestors did. Your grandpas and that, they were part of that. They understood, and that's kind of some of that stuff they just accepted. So this theory of the hot molten earth is actually not very old at all. Beyond that, all of this life came from chemicals. And where did the chemicals come from? A Big Bang. 13 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened. And where did the Big Bang happen? What did it come from? From nothing. So the entire modern science construct is built on nothing. You remember reading the Book of Mormon where it says that there was this, when Lehi sees this dream and he sees a cross and he sees this building that's in the air without a foundation. What's underneath it? Nothing. The whole modern science construct is built on nothing. So maybe you see some corollary there, right? So that's the whole theory of relativity. Put it together, that's what modern science, in a nutshell, looks like. Okay? Now, how do we know what we know? Answers come from questions. Now, I'm going to actually have Seth. Part of what we need to do today is get our kids involved in sharing these truths. Because if you can remember, have you ever been a teacher in any class, any of you, in a Sunday school class? Who learns more, the student or the teacher? The teacher. So part of our whole philosophy in our workbook curriculum is the idea of consecration by sharing. So I'm going to have Seth come up for a minute. And he's going to do his best to tell the story of answering questions.
Hello, I'm Russ Barlow. I am 14 years old and the 14th child of my family. I want to share something with you guys I've learned the past years. I've been helping my mom do these workbooks, and it's pretty fun. Probably one of my favorite lessons. So it starts with you have to have an open mind. So there's 4 different types of mindsets. And that's critical, skeptical, partial, and objective. Those 4 mindsets are different mindsets, obviously, and only one of them is actually the correct mindset to go with. Modern science would say critical, but that's not the one you should go with. It's objective, is what I learned. Because if you have an objective mindset, then you're open to more things. You'll listen more. You'll open your heart more to learn more things. There are 2 types of questions: knowledge questions and wisdom questions. Knowledge questions are who, what, when, and where. Those questions help us understand the world around us, help us know tangible items, like fingers, like benches, helps us understand it. While wisdom questions helps us comprehend the world around us. They help us understand intangible items like air and other things that you cannot touch. But you need knowledge questions to understand wisdom questions first. Because without knowledge, you won't have wisdom. And without comprehension and understanding, you won't increase your intelligence. You'll be done. So if you have knowledge, you get understanding. If you have wisdom, you get comprehension, and together you get increasing knowledge, and increasing intelligence, and a higher level of learning. So thank you.
I think you did a good job. So this learning process is actually in both Volume 1 and Volume 2. It's in the beginning set, the introductory chapters. It's also at the beginning of every single one of our workbooks, because the process of asking questions and learning how to ask the right questions is fundamental to the way that we can comprehend and understand the world around us. Now, scripturally, there's some pretty profound implications here. Like he said, there are 2 types of questions: knowledge questions and wisdom questions. And there's actually, this example is played out pretty clearly in the scriptures. So for example, what's the tree, the fruit of the tree that Adam and Eve partook of? The tree of knowledge, right? They partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What that is knowledge, tangible things for them to grow. Now, Joseph Smith receives a revelation that truth is knowledge of things as they are, as they were, and as they are to come. So truth is the definer of what knowledge is, knowledge that doesn't change. So knowledge of things. Did you notice truth is knowledge of things that doesn't change? So things are what, where, when, and who. Place, person, time, event. These are the knowledge things. Now, in the book of Moses, Joseph receives this translation, receives a commandment to translate the Bible 2 months after the Book of Mormon's published. So it's 1830, July of 1830. Joseph receives a revelation, or June of 1830 actually, he receives this revelation to translate the Bible. And one of the things that he does is first thing he does is receives this revelation about what Moses was experiencing when Moses was told how this whole earth was created. And one of the questions Moses has asked God the Father while he's there is he says, tell me how this is and I'll be happy. And God answers him and says, here is wisdom, and it remaineth in me. So the wisdom question of how that Moses asked was, the Lord told him, that's my prerogative to give you the wisdom when you ask. Now later, when Adam is cast out of the Garden of Eden and he's shown how to sacrifice the animals and he's told to sacrifice, after many days, the angel comes and says, why are you offering sacrifice? See, he's asking him a wisdom question. And what's his answer? I know not, save I was commanded. So he doesn't have the wisdom of why he's offering the sacrifice until you've done the work, you've got the knowledge, here's the wisdom. It is after the similitude of the only begotten Son. Another example is Nephi. When the Lord tells him, I want you to build a boat not after the manner of men. Nephi doesn't ask why or how. He says, where do I go find the ore? He asks a knowledge question. So by learning to ask the knowledge question, it sets up a whole different paradigm of how we approach the Lord and how we want to understand something. Because you need to reshape those questions into knowledge questions. And then get the knowledge. Go after the knowledge. That's our job. It's our responsibility to go after knowledge. And then the Lord will give us the wisdom. And when those two things combine, that's what increases intelligence. We had an experience with one of my autistic daughters. They were twin autistic daughters. When they were in school in their special needs program, one of the teachers didn't like one twin, but liked the other. And she told their mother, the best thing that can happen is she could be sterilized so that she doesn't get into trouble, and said these kind of terrible things. And they said, by the way, their IQ can increase. It's impossible to increase IQ. Well, with the kind of things they were saying, we pulled her completely out. And now we have one autistic daughter being homeschooled and one in the school system. After a year, and Heidi brought her home and started doing some hands-on project-based stuff by a guy named Glenn Doman, and actually told the story about how to increase the brain and heal brain injury. They tested it. They did the IQ test again at the end of the year, and the daughter at home increased her IQ considerably. And they said it's impossible, so they tested again to confirm it. So by teaching the right way, by bringing in this knowledge-based approach, you can increase intelligence. This is a really fundamental, important thing, is the way we do that. So let's go through, I'm going to go through real quick what modern science thinks, and I'm going to show you a comparison. So modern science says that the earth was formed when rocks crashed into each other. That's the accretion theory. So the sun was formed first, what's left over is the earth, and it forms this thing. And the crashing rocks melt, and they sink to the center. The earth stays hot because of radioactivity. The plates are floating on this molten magma. And the water on the earth comes from comets in space, so it's not here, it comes from outside. The earth is 4.5 billion years old. Man and all life comes from a single-celled organism. Life came from chemicals. Chemicals came from the Big Bang, and the Big Bang came from nothing. Okay? That's what it came from, just nothing, flat out. There we go. Okay, so this is what Genesis says. In the beginning, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and God moved upon the face of the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. It's actually kind of amazing to understand the science in that one statement. So, first of all, it says the earth was without form. So in science vernacular, a solid like ice or a piece of steel or that bench that you're sitting on, it has form. It occupies definite space and definite volume. No matter how I throw it around, it doesn't change. Gas occupies no space and has no form. It just fills the whatever space that it has available. That's the scientific definition of gas. Well, liquid is defined as being without form because it fills whatever. If it's a cylinder, it'll fill that cylinder. If you drop it on the ground, it'll go flat. So this might sound a little technical, but by saying without form, it actually is describing liquid. The other part, it says that the earth was without form and void. This is something cool. I'm writing a book on water right now because there's a new concept called sonoluminescence. Sonoluminescence is you take a beaker of water, it has to be degassed, has to be completely empty of everything, impurities, and then you could drop a bubble, or when you drop a water in it, kind of a bubble appears, and if you have sound going through that flask, that bubble will float. It'll just suspend itself, the bubble down here in the middle, not up here at top, just in the middle, okay? But the sound, if you tune that frequency, it will cause light to appear in that bubble. Okay, this is just a little flask. The experiment's called a star in a jar because they can't believe this is happening. They put sound into that, but it has to be completely void of all impurities. Now think about this. The earth is without form and void. It's pure. It's without impurities. And God said, "Let there be light." He voiced light into being. And yet we can produce that in a little teeny scale. We can produce light with sound in a beaker of empty water. Now that's kind of cool, right? But here's another property of water. It's called cohesion or surface tension. The water molecules pull themselves together to make the smallest possible space. And so water forms a sphere. Water pulls together and forms a sphere. Now, it does it even in gravity. If you see a drop, now we kind of draw the little teardrop, right? That's how we see water. But that's only because at the moment that it pulls from the faucet, it pulls a little tail just for a second, but immediately it turns into a sphere. It pulls together and it forms a sphere. So water forms a sphere, whether it's in gravity or out of gravity. Empty water with sound produces light. So this is just in the first verse and chapter, first chapter and verse of the Bible. This is before Joseph added a few things to it that make it really pretty cool. So Genesis 1:2 says, "The earth was without form and void." And in verse 1 through 9 it says, "God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and the dry land appears." So we have all these references to water, that the earth is actually created in water. Scientifically we know it is. All these experiences that are being described as the earth, dry land appearing from water, okay? The reason that's important there is because we want to look at the contrast between the creation summary and modern science. Here's the modern science version. It's the three simple steps are: sun is first. The leftover stuff forms the earth, which is land. And the third thing, comets bring water from space. But the creation story says that water's first, and then the land appears, and then on day 3, the sun, moon, and the stars. Okay, so you see these are completely opposite. But what else is different? Well, look at this. Modern science says that the earth is before the sun, the sun is before the earth, but in the Bible account, it's earth first. Oceans are before land in the Bible. Light is before the sun in the Bible. Land, plants are first before the Bible. In the Bible, fruit trees are before fish. Fish are before insects. These things are completely opposite in all these accounts that come down from the creation account. And there's a lot more. They just keep going, right? So you've got marine mammals before land mammals, birds before reptiles, atmosphere between 2 layers of water. But here's the big thing. Man brought death into the world. But according to modern science, death, or the death evolution, brought man into the world, this process of evolution. Those are the two opposites. But even worse than that is that according to the Bible, God created man. Now we know he organized man. But in modern science, man created God. So, can you tell me how you're going to merge those together? Can you fit them together in your teaching, in your theology? It's pretty impossible, isn't it? These are two completely opposing worldviews here. Completely different churches. All right, so let's look at what modern science sees, though. Let's just take a quick look at it. Elon Musk says that one of the most exciting things in the last 25 years is the discovery of water on Mars, water ice on Mars. How much? if you'll notice right there at the top, the purple area, that's 64% water. That's a lot of water on Mars, just right under the surface. All of those areas have water, and in the Mars Hydro Valley, it's a giant valley. It's about 3 to 5 times bigger than the Grand Canyon. This whole thing was formed by a massive flood, and all of these little indications they're just water features all over the surface of Mars. On Mercury, there's between 100 billion and 1 trillion tons of ice. On Venus, there was once an ocean that was 100 times more than there is now, and enough to cover the whole Earth. In Jupiter, the atmosphere in Jupiter is about 4 times the atmosphere of Earth. It's water atmosphere. Uranus has that too, so does Neptune. All of these are water-based and water planets. They have water on the surface. Even the moons of Jupiter. These of the 4 Galilean moons, 3 of them are known to have rock, a water icy core or surface or something. But it gets better because when we look at the moons around Saturn, these are all hydro moons. One especially is interesting because this right here, this is the moon, and this is actually the size of the water or the hydrovolcano that is erupting off of that moon. Now the Cassini spacecraft, when it flew through that, they actually were able to detect what the stuff coming out of that moon was, and they know it was water. So this is water coming off of a moon, and an enormous amount of it. Here's this section right here shows the temperature of this fault line right here, and that fault line, there's a picture of it right there, is actually where that's coming from. So there's a frictional fault line on the moon, and it's hotter right at the fault line, and that's where water's coming out. Water's turning to gas and being blasted out. So in all of these things, what we're looking for is the evidence that we can point back to how the earth was created, things that we can start teaching our children. This is the true science about how this works together. In the 1950s, the guy that invented the maser, which would eventually become this laser. We all know what lasers are. Lasers are used in DVD players and all kinds of stuff, right? But he developed this way. What a laser is just a light amplified device that resonates and aligns all the light. Now he developed one that did it for microwaves called a maser. And he aims, he does all the discovery and he finds out, and he aims it out in space because he comes up with the idea that there are these masers emitting this particular wavelength of energy that's coming from these little narrow spaces, narrow places out in space that's producing this energy. And what is energy? Energy is a form of light or sound. Okay, that's what energy is. And so let's get these masers, and he's looking for the hydroxyl molecule. He gets that, proves it, and says, well, what else could we look for? It's really close to the water molecule. Now, hydroxyl is an OH molecule, and water is H2O, so it's just one more hydrogen. That's the water molecule. And so they say, what if there's water out there? So they had some time on the Navy's telescope, and it's the Christmas party, and one of the diehard scientists is out there studying, and he turns the telescope to the star cloud Orion. That's where it's one of the most beautiful things you can see in space. Through your telescope, if you have an opportunity. I have a telescope. I take people out on our tours, and we look at that. And it's a fantastic sight. But it's here that stars are being born. Modern science looks at and sees these stars born. So they turn this telescope, this radio telescope, to the Orion star cloud, and the water line is so powerful in the Orion star cloud that he excitedly calls up and says, it must be raining in Orion. There's so much water in Orion. So now we've got water on all the planets. We've got water on the moons. We've got water in the star cloud. Then we send up a satellite. And this satellite's designed to just stare at the sun. Now this went up about the same time as the Hubble telescope went up. And when the Hubble first went up, they discovered that somebody had ground the lens wrong, and it was blurry. And they thought it was pretty much going to be $1 billion boondoggle, messed up. But they came up with a way to fix it, and they put a lens on it that was able to correct that, and everybody was happy. Well, the same time, they sent this satellite up, and it began to tumble. And they opened the hood. Sorry, I said that out of order. They actually opened the hood so they could stare at the sun, and guess what? It's blurry. Oh no, this is number 2 in a row. We're in trouble. But then one of the gyroscopes malfunctioned. It spun out of control a little bit. They realigned it, and when it did, all of a sudden it cleared up. And they realized what had happened is it had fogged up. There was water, liquid water, 1 million miles out from Earth where this satellite was stationed. 1 million miles out, liquid water. They never had imagined that it was possible to have liquid water in outer space. So now we've got water in star clouds, we've got water in interstellar space, intrastellar space in our planets, and they realize ice and this water is pretty much everywhere. But what do you think is the least likely place that we would find water? Where's the last place that you could possibly imagine? How about the sun? Yeah, they found the water line on the sun. So this right here, these little spikes are the water line on the sun, the water, liquid water. You couldn't understand what's going on. Now, personally, I think there's a whole lot more to be discovered about what that sun really is. But the thing we can draw from all of this is that there's water everywhere in outer space. Moons, planets, stars, interstellar space, even our sun. Water is everywhere. So they published an article that said maybe our ideas about the Earth being drenched in molten magma may be wrong. Well, we agree. They continued on and they still say it's all magma. But what if we looked at the Earth as being a water planet? What if we conceived of the Earth being created in water as it was explained in Genesis? Well, then we would have water in rocks, and it turns out that we do. Obsidian is a rock. I'm going to pass this around. I need somebody to be up here that can take this. Ben. So this is a piece of obsidian, okay? And that's just been broken in half. You can pass that around and look at it. Obsidian has water in it. So in other words, if I took a torch and tried to heat that rock up, it would just shatter in a million pieces because it's got water in it. If you heat it up really slow, you can extract the water. This is how much water is in that rock right there. It's rock about this big, okay? That's a lot of water. Now, if the rock had been formed on the surface of the earth, if molten rock had flowed out on the surface of the earth with water in it, this is what the rock would look like. The reason is that water changes when it goes from a liquid to a gas. It expands 1,700 times, and it does so pretty explosively. Okay, so when you pressure cook, how many have pressure cooked in your house here? You've done any canning? Do you know what the pressure is on your pressure cooker? About 10 to 15 psi. Pretty low pressure. What if you built that thing up to about 100 psi? What would happen to it? Blow up, and it would be really dangerous. Just 100 psi. So when this water expands 1,700 times in molten rock, it turns it into pumice, or it turns it into lava, which is kind of a scoria, lots of holes in it, and it's very lightweight stuff. And so the fact that this actually has water intact says that it had to cool under pressure somewhere, and we'll talk about that. This is an experiment we did with our kids. Okay, we did these experiments we've created workbooks to show so you can do this with your own kids. We went and gathered a bunch of rocks in one particular area. This is in Las Vegas. We gathered this rock near Lake Mead which is part of a volcanic district. Now I want you to notice right there, that says 741.99 grams. That's how heavy that rock was. And what we did is we used 2 scales and we averaged the weight, and we made sure the temperature was right. So we get rid of all the variables. All we want to do is know what happens when we heat the rocks up. So we had a bunch of them. There's a total of about 30 different rocks from all over, and we wanted to heat them up. We had to have them in the house for like a week to make sure there was no rainwater or something else, right? Make it as equal as possible. We washed them all so they're clean, got rid of the dirt, and then let them completely dry for a week. Baked them for about 4 hours at 500 degrees, and then weighed it again. That same rock weighed 717 grams. Remember what it was before? 741, and now it's all of a sudden 717. That's how much water was in that rock. 25 grams of water in a single rock. Can you imagine what might happen if our mindset would change from a hot molten earth to a water planet? If our kids, our physicist kids that are wanting to explore that, could find out how to extract water out of crystalline rock? What would that do to our drought? What would that do to the desert if we could find that kind of rock? I mean, there's half a shot glass, a little more than half a shot glass, in a rock the size of a softball. Imagine how much water. It's not in the hydrological cycle. It can never recharge. It's in there only during the creation period, and once it's out, it never goes back. Now, here's a real life example. Have you ever built a campfire ring of rocks, and when you first start the fire, they pop? Pop. They crack. Why do they crack? Because of water. The water that's in that rock. Now, once it's heated up, you can do the fire again, and it won't pop anymore because it outgassed the water. But when that water expanded at first, if it got too hot too quick, it will pop the rock, break the rock. So water is in all rocks. Now here's an example of this little bubble right here. Here's a bubble. These are little bubbles. And I've got one of those. I'll pass that around. Here, Ben. So hold this up to this kind of on the top and just look right here. Just tip that back and forth a little bit, okay? And you can see that's a piece of quartz that has water in it. Now, it was so interesting that 2,000 years ago, Aristotle said that quartz is just water that's frozen so hard it can never melt again, because they couldn't explain how it's possible that it could have an air bubble in there. It's because it formed not from melted rock, but from water. Everything formed in water. So to understand how rocks are formed in water and how important that is to us, we're going to talk about the universal flood. Universal flood. Today, quite often, you'll hear people say it was a regional flood because there's no way to justify how much water was on the surface of the earth, but it could have been a regional flood. Have you ever heard that? Maybe thought that. Here's the problem, though, is God made a promise that he would never flood the earth again, and he puts the bow in the sky as a token. If it was a regional flood, have we had regional floods? Yes, that would make Christ a liar. And we know he's not. So it's not a regional flood. This is a whole flood. But it's hard for us to comprehend how the whole earth was covered with water, right? I mean, it's 8,000 miles across. Can you guys comprehend 8,000 miles? How about the thickness? The average thickness of the crust is about 125,000 feet thick. Now, it's thicker on the continent and thinner on the oceanic floor, but we're going to just kind of simplify and average it out to 125,000 feet. Can you imagine that? I would say probably not. Most of us can. It's 125,000 feet of rock is kind of hard to imagine, right? But if we shrink it to the size of an earth, we can understand that the thickness of the crust on our basketball-sized earth is as thin as a single sheet of paper. So that 125,000 foot thick crust on our earth, shrunk to the size of a basketball, becomes as thin as a single sheet of paper. That paper, 125,000 feet thick. Now, there are two forces in equilibrium right now, gravity and centrifugal force. You all experience gravity every day. But centrifugal force is something a little different. But you've probably seen a bucket that you've had water in that you've swung around over your head, right? And the water didn't fall out. What keeps the water in the bottom of the bucket? The swing or the centrifugal force that keeps that out there. So there are two forces at work when the earth is spinning. Gravity is trying to pull the crust down. Centrifugal force is trying to push the crust out. And those two things keep it. Now, one thing modern science and universal model agree with is that the plates are floating. They think it's floating on magma. We say that it's floating on water. But they are floating, and they're moving. And they move, and as they move, they create earthquakes and volcanoes on these plate boundaries. So we know they're moving. But when these two forces are knocked out of equilibrium, the universal model proposes that that was a comet. We don't know that. We weren't there. But it's a plausible idea that a comet didn't hit the Earth, but just perturbed its spin. Something did to slow the spin rate down of the Earth by about 0.01%, just a tiny bit. And when that happened, gravity stayed the same, but the centrifugal force was reduced slightly. And when it did, the crust broke. The fountains of the great deep burst, and water came out of the crust, and the crust sunk. Now, eventually, the crust would be covered by 30,000 feet of water. 30,000 feet is about a third of the thickness of that piece of paper on our basketball-sized earth. So the crust, that paper-sized thin crust, sunk about a third of the thickness of that paper, and it was under 30,000 feet. That's a little more comprehensible, isn't it? In fact, that's like, wow. If you were standing on the moon looking at the earth, you would see no visible change. The earth, the crust just simply sunk. And when it did, it created an environment of enormous frictional heat and also pressure. Now, all of you take your hands and rub them together. Push them as hard as you can, okay? You're creating about 2 to 4 psi, okay? Now, strong guys, yeah, you probably get more than that. But the bottom line is you're creating a pretty minute amount of frictional heat, but your hands are warming up. If you move 10,000 feet of rock, 1 millimeter, you produce enough heat to melt that rock. If you have 126,000 feet of crust moving a little bit, you're producing enormous amounts of heat. In fact, all of the volcanoes that happen on Earth today are associated with crustal plate movement. They happen on the boundaries, except for Hawaii, and there's a whole different reason, and we can explain that. But all the volcanoes on the Pacific Ring of Fire, or the volcano that is recently in Indonesia and all this, like the one up in Alaska, those are on the plate boundaries because they're slipping by and they're creating enormous amount of frictional heat. It's melting rock, and the rock is manifesting in melted rock. But also, in that pressure zone, we create enough pressure so that when that molten rock flows out underwater, 30,000 feet, that can cool with the water still intact in it. And that's how obsidian forms. We'll talk about that in just a second. So after the flood's all over, everything resumes, the earth comes back into equilibrium, and that equilibrium kind of pushes the crust back out, but now it's been crashed together, it's broken, and things start to move across, and the flood is over in about 1 year and 2 months. Okay, now in the Bible, it describes that the earth, that this flood period, that the fountains of the great deep flowed for 150 days. That's about 6 months. And then after that, it was a full year before Noah was able to leave the ark. And the water lowered, but not entirely. It left behind a lot of lakes. There were things that here for a long time, like Lake Bonneville, Lake Lahontan, Glacial Lake Missoula. All those are leftover remnant lakes of this massive event when the fountains of the great deep burst. And it created this water everywhere, and it's also created these pressure zones of heat, water, and pressure. And we see the evidence of this stuff all over the earth in these kind of craters. And one of the central features of the Universal Model Book is the Arizona crater that's in Arizona near Flagstaff. That's the meteor crater. Have any of you ever been there? We prove conclusively that it's not a meteorite that formed that it's actually a water crater. And if you want afterwards, I don't have it in this slideshow, but afterwards I'll show you where it is and you can look it up. There are 10 evidences why that is not formed by a meteorite, and 10 proving that it was formed in water. But here's a cool place. You can go to Kodachrome Basin, which is near Bryce Canyon. Anybody been there before? Okay, so Kodachrome, if you're driving into the park, there's the road that drives into the park. This is behind you, so you don't often notice it. But if you drive out, you'll notice that see these lines right here. These show a diatreme, and you can see the layers right here. Here's this layer, and all of a sudden how it comes down here. Because those layers are in the form of a funnel, and this right here, this tube right here, is a place where this water came blasting out that was forming the area of that Kodachrome Basin. Now, here's the rock that was there, and what happened is it filled it, and then when it stopped flowing, all the rocks that were in it solidified and became this column of rock that fell out. And that left that, so you could call that like the fossil remnant of that. And right here on the top, all this gravel rock is the same material that was in that column. So that's just a tiny example. The Arizona crater is another big example. So the event that formed, that created these rocks, is called a hypertherm. Okay, it's heat, water, and pressure. That's the high is hydro, and pressure is pressure, and therm. So it's water, pressure, and heat. Modern science only talks about heat and pressure. Rocks are changed through heat and pressure. They never really talk about water because that would change the whole paradigm of modern science's rock cycle theory. in the hypertherm, we had a pressure of 13,000 psi under 30,000 feet of water. Now, there's a reason why we need that kind of pressure, and there's also a reason. It's not because that Mount Everest is 29,000 feet that we say, oh, that proves that the water was this deep during the flood, because Mount Everest actually wasn't there before the flood. It's flood rock that's been lifted up. But the Bible does say that all the mountains, all the high hills were covered by water. The reason that we know it's 30,000 feet is because of some of the things that are found all over the earth. So we also have heat between 350 and 400 degrees Celsius, which is about 650 to 750 Fahrenheit. That's pretty stinking hot water. Water boils at 210 Fahrenheit. And this is 600 to 700 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's pretty hot. But it's not boiling when it's under that much pressure. When it's deep down under 30,000 feet, it's not boiling. And so because of that pressure, it allows rocks like obsidian to cool with the water still in its system under at least about 9,000 meters, which is about half of that, 9,000 feet, 3,000 meters, about 9,000 feet of water. It has to be at least that, and then it can cool. But another thing we find is quartz crystals that are formed floating in water. Okay, now these little crystals right here are double terminated. It means they were never stuck to anything. And when they're found as if they were formed floating in water. And here's another. It's a Herkimer diamond. It has a little water in it. Okay, Herkimer diamonds are actually quartz crystals found in Herkimer mines in New York. But we can find them everywhere. Some of these same crystals appear in Overton, Nevada, or in other places. In fact, all crystals that are made by man are formed in water. They've never been able to form these kind of crystals in a melt. They've always been able to form them in water. And here's an example of a crystal that was formed in water. And this one's, they put impurities in it to make it blue, but that center sheet is actually a quartz seed. And here's a man-made piece of quartz. Okay, you can kind of see the seed plate in the middle and the wire that's hanging from the top. That was grown in about 2 months. Okay, so that's actually a lab grown. We didn't grow that one. That was grown in a Russian autoclave. But what we did is grow quartz crystals. And we found that a crystal like that size could double in size. So a little crystal about the size of a bean, like a little bean, will double in size in 24 hours. We can grow a quartz crystal doubled in size in 24 hours. The silica liquid is dissolved silica, and it just so happens that under 30,000 feet, or actually 13,000 psi, when the water is hot to that 350 degrees Celsius, which is 600 or so Fahrenheit, silica will dissolve. And when it dissolves, now it's in solution, it'll precipitate out and form crystals on that. And why that's important is because you'll see in a minute why that's important to understand about making how petrified wood and things are formed. I'm going to skip the part about quartz is not glass, except to talk about one thing. I'll pass this crystal around. Okay, here's a naturally grown crystal. And so because we know they grow pretty fast, a crystal like that would have grown in a matter of a couple or 3 months. And the other part of knowing that it's not glass is piezoelectricity. Okay? And piezoelectricity is, I'll show you this after when I rub this together. And I don't think it's dark enough in here for you to see. I'll try to show you there, but can you see any light in that? Any blink? Any flash? Okay. Okay? That's electricity. That's electricity. So afterwards, come take a look at that, and I'll show you in person, and you can actually smell it. You can smell the electricity. But the electricity couldn't be there if it gets hotter than 570 degrees. In other words, if it melts, if it becomes melted, that's what silica melted becomes glass. So if it was melted, it would not have that piezoelectric effect. And almost about 70% of the rocks on the surface of the earth are silicate-type rocks, and they have a piezoelectric effect. And that's really important to understand when we talk about the energy field around the earth, which we recognize as a magnetic field, also about what causes lightning and aurora. All those things are pretty cool stuff. That's in the back chapter of that book. But our focus today is just on the creation of quartz and crystals and about how they all happen in water. And you have to grow the quartz in water to be able to have that piezoelectric effect. And that's what we'll show you after. Here's another part of this. It's pretty interesting. Coral pink sand dunes and imperial dunes in California, two completely different areas, and we're looking at the sand. Now, if you saw coral pink sand dunes, most of you are probably familiar with that red sand. You know coral pink? Have you been down there? And you look at the sand, you say, oh, that's red sand, right? Look at it a little bit closer and say, yeah, definitely, that's red sand or brown sand. Until you put it under a microscope and you realize the sand is not red at all. The crystals in the sand are clear. And what it is, it's the staining of the crystal that makes it red. It's the stuff that's happening outside the crystal. And the same thing, these are imperial dunes. So if you look here, that's brown until you look under a microscope and they're clear. Clear crystals. So if they really truly eroded from a mountain somewhere, they must have eroded from a clear mountain. Have you ever hiked a clear mountain before? There are no clear mountains. This sand was formed in place. In fact, because we actually produce the quartz crystals and we produce sandstone, we know that these kind of quartz crystals grow in a matter of minutes to hours, and they're done. And they start and they stop immediately. Now, on our tour that we take every year at least, sometimes more than once, we start our tour about the Grand Canyon in Las Vegas. And the reason we do is that there's a place that you can walk up to the bottom layer of the Grand Canyon, and you can stand on the creation rock, the foundational rocks in the Grand Canyon, but you don't have to hike 8 miles down because a piece of the Colorado Plateau tipped sideways and came over and just sat there for us, so we don't have to do that. We can walk up to the bottom and stand on creation rock and touch the first layer of flood rock, which is Tapete sandstone. Now, Tapete sandstone is made up of a bunch of these tiny crystals. But the Tapete sandstone layer covers an area that goes all the way up into the Arctic, covers the entire United States, and even down into Mexico. That's a pretty big layer of sand to have blown in from a mountain somewhere, right? And there's similar formations all across the entire globe. And so these multiple layers, once we understand how quartz crystals are formed, we know how the sandstone layers of places like the Grand Canyon formed in a matter of like 1,000 feet of Navajo sandstone formed in a matter of days. Because the quartz crystals formed all at once. Authogenic is what they're called. It formed all at once. And then, so now they're quartz crystals, but they're still floating in a very silica-rich solution, but it's under 30,000 feet of water, so it's high pressure. And so that's cemented together into a single mass of rock that might be 1,000 feet thick. Now that might sound pretty crazy, that I'm saying a whole layer like that forms in a matter of a few days. But let me ask you a question. When you look at that, where are the soil layers that would have been there if it took thousands or millions of years? Where are the fossils? Where are the coal or the salt or the oil or any other thing that should have been there if it was laid down over time? And how come it's just quartz crystals? And how come they're all the same grain size? And how come there's not anything else that was blown in, any other types of rock? And it's because we've made this sandstone. So this isn't a theory. We've actually made sandstone like this. So we know the process. We just haven't made 1,000 feet thick of it. But we know the process of how quartz crystals form, and we know how sandstone forms. But we also know, because of that fossils are rocks, like petrified wood and dinosaur bones and those kind of things. They're also rocks, and they're crystalline rock. I want you to look hard at this particular picture right here. This is one of my favorite pictures. I actually went and just in the last couple of months bought one just because something very special occurred to me this year on one of our tours where we go through the Grand Canyon, we go to the Arizona crater, we end up at Petrified Forest. But that's a really special rock, and I'll share why in a minute. Petrified wood is found everywhere on the planet. Petrified wood is on all continents, in all countries. It's even in the Arctic Circle. Axel Heiberg Island has dogwood trees, which are only found today in the deep south, petrified, clear up in the Arctic Circle. That's kind of confusing. How did that get there, right? So petrified wood, though, is a quartz crystal. It's a rock just the same. I didn't bring any piece of petrified wood this time. But petrified wood is the same as a quartz crystal. And because we knew how to make quartz crystals, we applied the exact same thing and made petrified wood. We actually made petrified wood, February of 2005, after 55 attempts, because what was happening is the wood would keep getting destroyed because of the heat and the pressure and all that, until we got the mix right, until the chemistry was right, the temperature was right, everything was perfect, and all of a sudden, it finally worked. And this piece of petrified wood right here, these aren't big, because our autoclave is only 3/4 of an inch. It required that high pressure. We need 13,000 psi. Remember the canner that can only have between 10 and 15? And what would happen? We have 13,000. So that's actually built outside in a steel case that's insulated so that if it blows up, it goes up and not in. Because it's really dangerous to be under that much pressure. There's not a lot because it's just a little bit on top, but that's how much pressure that you need to do that. Well, after we did that, it was able to reproduce that a number of times. So these are different, like this is a geode of run 55, but here's another one. Here's run 74, another piece of petrified wood. Okay, and I've got one of the posters right here that shows that a little bit clear, that you can kind of come up and afterwards we can take a look at that and see how that worked. And then we have this question all the time, because we talk about petrified wood, but everybody wants to know, where did the dinosaurs, how do they fit into this? Now, I grew up being told that the earth was created of other earths, and so to make sense of what I was being told in school, like probably a lot of you have, at least your moms and dads have, is that we said, oh, that must have been an earth that had dinosaurs on it that didn't live up to the measure of its creation, so it was destroyed, and those pieces of earth were taken over and made into our earth. And that's how we got dinosaur bones here. And that's just because we're trying to blend theology. We're trying to make sense of this stuff. Never mind the fact that the dinosaur bones are only found on the surface and all those other confusing things that don't line up. Okay? But the most common thing we find are dinosaur eggs, and there's a reason for that. And I'll probably get into it for just a minute. But we actually finally discovered the truth about why there are no dinosaurs here. And this is the reason. There were 2 arks, and one of them just didn't make it. Okay, the kids love this one. The fact is every single dinosaur quarry in the world is found in flood sediment. Every single one of them. And so if we find one in Arctic Alaska, the dinosaurs there died in a flash flood, says Scientific American. National Geographic says that the ones in Patagonia died, dinosaur nests were covered or smothered in a flood. And then in Argentina, they perished in a flood. In Xinjiang, China, it was a mass death, probably from flooding. Illinois, it was death by a catastrophic flood. And then in Alberta, Canada, Centresides were trying to cross a river in a flood. Those guys, can't believe it. All of those people died in a flood. Well, here in Montana, in the Hell Creek Formation, you've heard of the Hell Creek Formation? That's probably just a little bit to the east of you. In the Hell Creek Formation, they found a herd of hadrosaurs, more than 1,000 individuals all balled up and rolled into a ravine. More than 1,000 individuals. Now, a hadrosaur is a big guy. His femur bone, that's the biggest bone in your body, is your femur bone. His bone's 8 feet long, and they found a femur bone sheared lengthwise. Can you imagine the force that happened in order for that dinosaur bone to be sheared lengthwise? What kind of force was that? What caused 1,000 of these things to be balled up into a single ravine? Because they all died. The dinosaurs died in the flood. That's a part of the flood story, is the dinosaurs were there. Now, some of those dinosaurs, you might think this is crazy, there were dinosaurs on the ark. Do you believe that? There were. And there's a lot of evidence about that. Now, not all of them, but the ones that God sent. Because if you read the account, there's an interesting story in the book of Jasher. And in the book of Jasher, Noah doesn't take any of the animals on the ark. Noah gets on the ark, and the Lord sends the animals to him. And the Lord tells Noah, you will know which ones are to get on the ark, because whoever comes and bows before you are the ones you are to let on the ark. Not everybody gets on the ark because even some of the animals are corrupt. When God says that he sees an end of all flesh, he's also saying that even the animals are corrupt. So not all the animals are going to get on the ark, and you'll know which ones, Noah, by the ones that bow. And there's a story about a lioness and her two whelps. They all three show up, all three bow, and Noah is about to let all three of them on, but the cubs turn and chase the mommy off. And only the male and the female cub come on. So the ark story is actually very specific in its timing, and the reason we think things like dinosaur bones are found, the most common is dinosaur eggs, because things happened in the springtime of the flood happened in the spring. And they were babies on the ark, not full-grown animals. We also know the temperature of the ocean water from the experiments that we've done with shark teeth. Now, if you'll see here, there's a gradation of heat. 350 degrees is the temperature that we know was present for petrified wood and petrified dinosaur bones to form. We know that we got to 350. The most common shark teeth we find actually are black. But there are quite a few that are in this color range too. So shark teeth are the only part of the fish that survives because the rest of it, the cartilage of the fish, just completely dissolves and leaves only the teeth. So it's the only calcium carbonate part of the tooth. Now, sharks shed their teeth all the time. And when they fall to the ocean floor, within 24 hours today, marine organisms will immediately attack and begin to bore holes in to consume and eat up that shark tooth and just return it to the system. But all fossil shark teeth have no evidence of any boring because they fossilized instantly. They were actually in the fish's mouth, and they were being fossilized as that shark was dying and the stuff. And it's often found in kaolinite beds, which is related to the kind of material that would be in the shark's body. More than that, we found a piece of amber that actually has fish eggs. Just like we know fish lay their eggs in the spring, and so do frogs. There are both fish and frog eggs. We sent this, Dean didn't send the actual piece, he sent pictures to an expert fish guy in the University of Chicago that identified the type of egg and said, that can't be because this would change everything if that was true. But this actually little egg in here is not just a hard egg, it's still liquid. It still is moving inside. Now, there are a lot of things that go beyond this. Like, for example, a guy named Mark Armitage has discovered soft tissue in dinosaurs and dinosaur bones. It's impossible for soft tissue with blood to still be there if it's 250 million years old, or even if it's 65 million years old. So all of these stories we've been told about dinosaurs and how old they are simply based on false ideas. Now, you've probably heard the story about the great dinosaur killer, the meteorite that hit the Yucatan Peninsula, and that was the dinosaur killer 65 million years ago. Well, if you look at the actual crater, and we actually discussed this in Universal Model, Volume 1, you look at the shape of the crater, and what it is, it has an outwash channel. Because almost all of the craters that they talk about are formed not from meteorites, but from water fountains. Upheaval Dome is another crater that exists in Utah. It's in Canyonland. They say that was a meteorite, but you can stand on the rim of that one and you can see that there's actually ripple marks in the rocks. There's actually deposits of green and white sediment that you know had to have come out. And the biggest clue of all is there's this channel that goes right down to the Colorado River. So if that's a meteorite, who formed that outwash channel? So now here's what I want to talk about is how do we take this kind of information now and bring it into our families? So I'm just right now sharing information. It's in the book. But what does it really matter? What does it really matter? The last chapter, the last verse in the Old Testament is Malachi that says that the Lord would send Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers, lest the whole earth would be smitten with a curse. Are you familiar with that? So here's something kind of crazy, dads, and this is why I said this in the beginning. It really comes up to us as fathers. This comes up to us because I think we've neglected our duty to teach our children the truth about creation. And I'm not talking about passively teach, but I mean get in and really teach hard what this really is. Because the creation account is the first example of a covenant that God made and kept with mankind. He made the earth, He created the earth so that we could come and have a body. That was the first covenant made and kept. And then in the book of Moses it says, the work of our Father is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. That's His work and His glory. And His promise was that He would give us an earth that we would have. And His promise was to Enoch that the flood would come, but Enoch's descendants would live through the flood. And His promise was, and you can get this because you have the Joseph Smith translation available to you about the Bible. God met with Noah and said, I will renew the covenant that I made with your father Enoch, that in the last days, when they keep all of my commandments and they turn their hearts to heaven, then the city of Zion will come again on the earth. And I will put the bow in the heaven as a token of that covenant, so that when I look upon it, I will remember the covenant between me and thee. Now, have you ever been able to touch a rainbow? Have you ever been able to hold that in your hand as a token of a covenant? I mean, we see it and maybe we talk about it. It's a thing, right? Well, when Joseph Smith had the angel Moroni come, he repeated that last verse in that last chapter just a little bit different. He said that he comes to plant in the hearts of the children the promises made to the fathers. He came to plant in the hearts of the children the promises made to the fathers. One of those promises was in the last days that Zion's going to come again when we keep His commandments. And He gave them a token of the rainbow. Well, that piece of petrified wood that you saw, I believe, is a token of that covenant in stone. It is beautiful. It's the most colorful rock on the planet. It's all colors. It happened during the flood. That's the only time petrified wood ever happened. And it's like a token of the promise that I delivered Noah through the flood. And here's this piece of rock that looks like a rainbow that you can touch and feel and hold. Now, when Moses took the children of Israel and spent 40 years in the wilderness, as they crossed over, Moses was gone, and Joshua took them over. And the Lord told Joshua, have them get stones and make this pile and bring your children back and testify of how I delivered you. Have them remember that I delivered you. So when we hold this piece of petrified wood, this beautiful colored piece of petrified wood that serves no purpose other than just to be beautiful, I think we should remember that that is a token of the covenant that God made with Noah, that He would deliver Noah and that He would come again, that Zion would come again on the earth. And we need to plant in the hearts of our children that promise. And we need to do it by teaching them the facts and the knowledge about how creation really happened. Now, one of the things that's really important to know is that when Joseph Smith translated the Old Testament, he started with Genesis. Now, in Genesis chapter 1 of the King James Version, it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. But in the version that Joseph Smith translated, it says, and I, God, created the heavens and the earth. And my Spirit moved upon the face of the waters, for I am God. See the difference? This is third-person narrative in the King James Version. It is first-person narrative in the book of Moses, in Joseph's translation. In other words, I, the Creator, this is my story, and I want you to tell it to your kids. I want you to teach them the truth about the creation. And here's the science that you can do. And so that's what we've done with our workbooks. And I'm going to invite Heidi to come up and talk a little bit about how the workbooks came to be. And we're at 7:30, so I'm going to go probably about 15 or 20 minutes more at the most, and then we can have some questions and answers, and then I'll let you guys go, except for the ones that want to stay and talk.
Thank you. Hi, guys, you have to laugh more because you make me nervous. Okay, so the way we did these books is I have to always, I'm sorry.
Just tell the story.
Start with, I have 15 kids, and yeah, woo, okay. But my daughter, my first daughter, was born deaf. And so that really threw me for a loop, and I had to start learning how to teach, how to be a mother, the whole thing. I had to relearn everything. And we wanted her to speak. So a normal child can learn language and have to hear a word maybe 30 to 40 times, but a deaf child has to hear that word over 300 times. So it really got me to start having conversation in everything I did, and to narrate life, and to talk, and to do. And so that's how I started teaching again, and then I was blessed. A few boys later, I was blessed with autistic twins. They're severely autistic, and that was a whirlwind of insanity, because we put them in school, and it was just, nobody knew what to do with them. No, it was just horrible. And so we finally worked with them, and we worked with them with Glenn Doman, who, he is an incredible man. He's gone now, but he teaches how to help brain-injured children. So if you have a brain-injured child in any way, shape, or form, look at Glenn Doman's stuff, because that will help you a lot. And again, it was about hands-on. It's about touch. It's about movement. Kids learn with touch, language, movement. And so these workbooks are not the normal workbooks that you would get at Costco, where, those ones you get at Costco that you're going to give your kids through the summer, and then they're just going to hurry and finish. Did anybody's ever got one of those? No? Oh, well, this is, okay. Well, good for you. Okay, so this is not a normal workbook where you just open it up and tell your child to go learn. It's not going to happen. This workbook makes you think. It makes you study. It makes you, as a parent, or if you're going to put it in your school system, your teachers are going to have to learn this. This is not normal things that you learn, because this is truth. And it's been so long since we've learned truth. We haven't just been lied to for the last 50 years. We've been lied to for 100 years. Truly, we have to go back, and we have to start looking at the scriptures, and we have to teach from the scriptures. We have to get our fathers involved in teaching. We have to get our families involved in teaching. It has to become a family thing, where the little kids are learning from the bigger kids, and the bigger kids are learning from the little kids. And it's a whole thing the family's doing, because the family that's what our whole religion's about, is family. And then after you do family, and if we understood how much we've been lied to, and how much separating subjects is actually, all this separating age, separating subjects is all a lie. It's a lie. We've been lied to. So if you were to pull in your subjects and teach history, and in history you teach your English, and you teach all the other subjects, and it's alive, and the children are immersed in it, and they learn quick, and it doesn't take days and weeks and 5 hours a day. It takes a little bit, because children love truth. They love it. It goes right in them. Okay, back to the workbooks. So these workbooks are not normal, and you do have to study with them. What else do I miss?
Whatever else you want to share.
Let's see.
So the thing that, like the one I have up there, the geography workbook, for example, it's a project-based workbook.
Yes.
So what the kids are going to do through this entire year, and our kids are doing this, and they actually have a class that they're teaching other kids, and they teach for an hour and a half a week, and that's it. And then there's about 2 hours of other work that the kids will work on their maps, but that's the whole subject, and that's pretty much the the majority of what their whole school week looks like. Now they have to do math and some other English, but the majority of their work is on this geography book. But geography is about people. So when we talk about geography, we're not talking about just places like states and countries. We want to start with where people started. And that means that we start with where Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and we talk about how we know. What's the scientific evidence that we have about Adam and Eve being in the Garden of Eden? Well, we know that when Adam was cast out, that he had to be shown how to make tools that he could kill the animals that he was commanded to sacrifice. Those tools are the most advanced in all of modern archaeology, and they find these tools. They're called the Folsom and the Clovis points, and they're found in a particular place, only one place in the whole world. These are and this is what archaeology says, not scholars, not Book of Mormon scholars. This is what archaeology says. These are the most advanced, and we don't really know where they came from. There's no way to look across the Bering Strait and say they came there. They just seem to have appeared out of nowhere, and this is where they appeared. Okay, see that little country right there? Now, we don't know exactly what Pangaea looked like, but we do know that it was one country, and it just so happens that that's the location of where all those advanced projectile points, spear points and arrow points are. They're in America. So in relation to this whole continent, Adam lived here. We have the science behind it because we have his tools, which means that even though Joseph Smith received a revelation that the Garden of Eden was in Jackson County and that Adam was cast out and lived at Adam-on-Diamond, well, that's revelation, which we can believe, but we also have the science to back that up. We know that that's where they lived, which means that's where they built the ark. And so when you build on that science and then you come along and say, okay, the ark lands in Mesopotamia, and then the people begin to disperse from there, from the Tower of Babel. We compare it in the geography workbook to this is what the modern science version is out of Africa, and then this is what the Noah record is. So the workbook is based on showing you what modern science says and what the biblical record says, so that the kids actually have both sides. They get to have some exposure to both, learn it, and be able to defend that to their peers had they get into college or they do go on to something. Hopefully you won't send your kids to college. If you want to know why, tomorrow night.
That is so important. How many of you were all homeschooled? Good, okay, awesome. So when I was homeschooled, my mother would not teach me any nonsense like this, like, evolution. So she didn't. And so when I got with my peers, I felt stupid because they would talk about it like it was factual, and I felt stupid. And so when I started homeschooling my kids, I was so worried that I was stupid and I couldn't do it because I didn't have this knowledge. They have all these facts, and I'm just uneducated. Well, what really came to be is that I decided my kids need to know both sides, not so that they can know, so that they can, I don't know, what's the word?
It's not so they can choose necessarily,
So
but so
they
that they can actually have the facts that they need.
No matter what, your children, your grandchildren have to choose. They have to choose one way or the other. They will face it. In this world today, they're going to face it. And if they see both sides, and if they're given both sides, then they can face it and they can choose without feeling stupid. And I find that I didn't do that at first, and there's a couple kids I have that once their peers made fun of them, they flipped. And now they're all the way, evolution is true, and this is the way it is, because they were made to feel so dumb. And so we're always afraid, aren't we? A little bit. You're very careful because you don't want to be told something that's not true. You don't want to believe something that's not true. All of us are so careful. But we're allowing our children to choose these things, and we're letting this happen to them because we're not standing up front in science and letting them know. We're letting science kind of slip behind and take care of itself. It's not going to happen. Science is going to rip your children out of your hands. And I don't mean to be mean, but it's going to happen if we don't give them truth to fight with. I think that's all.
Thanks,
you
Heidi.
need to laugh more.
All right, one of the other books is our Life in the Human Body. And we did this because of all the controversy that was happening over gender and over all this other nonsense about what we were going to teach our kids. And it was we needed to get that done fast. In there, we actually teach the kids how to spot the knot. And we want them to learn how to read a science article and actually discern what's true and what's not. And so if you read this book right here, read this article, this is Scientific American, December 2007. So it's fairly new, it's common stuff. And it says, evolution in a Petri dish. If you were to read that article, what do you expect? What does that tell you? Okay, that evolution is true, essentially, right? And it actually says down here, microscopic worms on the verge of speciation provides evolution with experimental evidence creationism does not have. So they're actually not only just saying that this happened, but they're also saying that it's evidence that creationism, they're calling out the creationists. You know, you poor saps that actually think that the earth was created sooner. And they said, to my knowledge, it's the first time an evolutionary law has been demonstrated. Well, that's pretty absolute, isn't it? But I want you to notice something. What did that say right there? Microscopic words, what was that? On the verge of speciation? Oh, that's pretty absolute. That's the scientific evidence. How about this one right here in the picture caption? It says, newbie nematode in the lab, microscopic worm C. elegans, almost evolved into a separate species. And in the article up here it says, these worms have not fully evolved into a separate species, but they seem close. If you can teach your kids to read a science article and pull out those things, those inferences, that gives them the power to analyze all this massive amount of information. Now, they're never going to disprove everything. They don't need to. But they need to know that when they read this cool article, maybe it isn't saying what it says. The other part is we always want to make sure that we bring hands-on stuff. When kids make things, they seem to understand it. Now, DNA, this is them making a DNA strand, so they're understanding this. You might think that's pretty complex for 8-year-old kids. It's amazing what they will learn if you just expect that. And actually, you want to do something cool? Have the youngest teach the oldest. Now, at first, that'll seem to go pretty rough. But I can promise you, as each kid has a chance to teach, they actually learn more because they're put in that position as teacher. And so our kids have grown up and they do that now. We actually invite a family in every week, and we have done for the last 3 years. We'll bring a family or two in, and we'll have our kids teach the kids. And mom watches and kind of observes and does that. But that's because our whole philosophy is built on 5 principles. First, number 1, and the most important, is patriarchal integration. Fathers, dads, you need to be involved. Now, here's an easy way. If you're busy and you're working every day and you don't have time to actually get involved in teaching your kids, this is how my wise wife did it for me back when I didn't do that. She simply said, Dad, give them an assignment to write you a report that they have to have due to you on Thursday. And I would make that report different length depending on the ability of the child. And it would just be some random thing. I want to report on lightning, or I want to report on lightning bugs, whatever. And they would give me this report on Thursday. I would have to grade it, and then they'd write their final on Thursday. Mom could slave all week long. Guess who got the most glory? Me. They cared more about what I said than all the work that Mom did. Now, this is kind of strange, but think about this. When you have a child, Dad stands as the archetype of God. When that child prays, the only person he has in his mind to relate who God is at first is his father. So how his father acts, the things he sees his father do, that represents to him what God is. We stand as the archetype of God in our families, and we better stand up and have that responsibility and be that, because that's what they see. And now later on in life, they begin to get their own opinions, and that's fine. But at first, that's what they see. And so fathers need to be involved. Second, families need to be integrated. What's the opposite of integrated? Disintegrated. Integrate families so that you're teaching together. Stop separating the kids. That doesn't mean you have to all do, Dick and Jane books together exactly the same. But it does mean that you're learning the same subjects and you're working on projects together. It's family-related projects. Don't separate your subjects. History contains science. History contains English. You can tie it all together so that you're not because you know how you separate and you get things out? You can lie about things if they're separated. If you integrate them, then they begin to build this kind of internal structure where this and this and this all support things together. And that's what modern science, modern education has done, is pulled that apart. And the fourth thing is to make sure you integrate scriptures all the time. Everything needs to come back to Scripture. And then what we think is probably the other side of the most important, dads being the most important on this end, on the other end is consecration. If you teach for the love of learning, just so you can be smart, what's the purpose? We need to take what we learn and share it, and we do it by teaching each other, by creating maybe groups where you share opportunities for your kids to teach other kids, maybe where you invite people in, but you need to consecrate your time because that's how kids are going to learn to give back, and that's how they're going to learn to in your own little circle, that's how they'll learn to have not only live the gospel, but also live and have opportunities to work with other kids. That social thing everybody's worried about. Kids don't need peers to teach them. They need mom and dad to teach them, and then they need to share that information out. We also talk about in the body book about the sphere of life, and it's kind of interesting that the creation account follows agency. So in other words, rocks have less agency than plants. Plants have less agency than animals. Animals have less agency than man. And that creation process is all encoded in the Scriptures. Now, all of this comes down to, we came up here because we want to share truth. We absolutely love to go around and share this kind of stuff, but if we leave and you haven't come up with some way to engage your family in this, this might not be the right curriculum for your family, but you need to take something of this kind of thing and engage it in your family, get it in your family. I don't know of any other curriculum that actually talks about the earth being a water planet from a scientific point of view than the universal model that Dean Sessions and I worked on as editor. I don't know of any other one that does that. And we think the fight is on evolution. It's actually not. Evolution is based on the idea that the earth is billions of years old. We need to teach our children that the creation happened the way it says in the Bible. You need to have the inspired version of the Bible so you can share with your kids the true creation account. There's nothing wrong with the King James Version teaching it. It's just this much bigger in the inspired version. You need to be able to bring that in and make that just absolute as part of what you teach. And we would love to come back anytime. In fact, tomorrow, my presentation tomorrow is actually going to be about how America and the church, and you can put any church into this category, have fallen into apostasy. That might seem strong, but we've fallen into apostasy because we have failed to teach the truth. Now, Joseph, as president of the church, and Sidney Rigdon and Frederick G. Williams, this is the first presidency, receives a revelation, section 93. God said, I have commanded you to teach your children light and truth. And you have failed to teach your children light and truth, and for this reason the enemy has power over you. Now I give unto you a commandment that you teach your children light and truth. That's a commandment given to the highest ecclesiastical authority, Joseph as president and prophet, Sidney Rigdon and Frederick G. Williams. That's section 93. That's a commandment, I believe, that is specific and direct to us, to teach our children light and truth. And remember, what is light and truth? Truth is knowledge. Teach them knowledge. Teach them the truth of Scriptures. And I bear my witness that the Scriptures we have testify of the true creation and the true flood. And if we can get our children to believe the Scriptures, we'll have power over them. And we'll be able to say that. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.